Chosen one, pause for a moment, because the message that found its way to you was not written quickly, and it was not sent without hesitation. The person you love has been carrying these words quietly, returning to them in the stillest hours, changing one sentence, removing another, wondering whether honesty would bring you closer or reveal how deeply they have already fallen. They called it a final message, not because everything is ending, but because they can no longer continue hiding behind silence. Something within them has reached a turning point. They know that another unspoken day could create a distance neither of you truly wants, and so they are asking you to read before the moment passes, not with panic, not with fear, but with the gentle attention you give to something that might finally explain what has felt unfinished between you. Don't skip, because the most important part is not what they said first. It is what they almost deleted before pressing send. Their message began simply, "I do not know whether I still have the right to say this, but I need you to understand what my silence really meant." And behind that one line rests a truth they have struggled to admit even to themselves. Their silence was never emptiness. It was never a lack of care. It was the weight of feeling too much while not knowing how to express it without changing everything. You may have noticed their distance. You may have questioned why their presence felt so close one moment and unreachable the next. What you could not see was the private battle behind those shifting moments. Every time they moved closer, hope rose inside them. Every time they pulled away, doubt whispered that they might not be enough for the kind of connection they felt with you. They were not trying to confuse you. They were trying to protect themselves from the possibility that you might see the depth of their feelings and turn away. But something happened recently. It was not dramatic. No one else may have noticed it. It was a small moment that carried an unexpected weight. They heard something that reminded them of you. Perhaps a phrase you once used, a song connected to an old memory, or the sound of someone laughing in a way that made your presence return without warning. For a few seconds, everything they had carefully contained rose to the surface. And in that quiet instant, they realized that avoiding the truth had not made their feelings disappear. It had only made the absence louder. That was when they began writing. Not because they had every answer, but because they were tired of pretending the questions did not matter. Their hands paused over the words more than once. They wondered whether you had already moved beyond them. They wondered whether you still remembered the little details they thought only they had noticed. The way your voice softens when you are trying not to reveal emotion, the way you become quiet when something matters deeply, the way you carry strength even when you are exhausted from always being the one who understands everyone else. They noticed more than they ever told you. And this is where their message became harder to write, because they finally admitted something that frightened them with its honesty. You made me feel seen before I knew how to let myself be known. Read that slowly. They are not saying you rescued them. They are not placing the responsibility for their happiness on your shoulders. They are saying that your presence revealed parts of them they had kept hidden for so long that even they had forgotten those parts were still alive. Around you, they felt the possibility of becoming more honest, more open, more real. Yet the very possibility they wanted was also the one that made them hesitate. What if they stepped forward and said too much? What if the connection existed only in their imagination? What if they offered you the truth and discovered that the timing had already passed? These questions became walls, but tonight, those walls no longer feel safe to them. They feel like the reason something beautiful has remained unfinished. Stay till the end, because there is one sentence in their message that changes the meaning of everything before it. Before they reached that sentence, they confessed that they replayed certain conversations more times than you would ever guess. A casual word from you stayed with them for days. A moment you may have forgotten became something they returned to whenever life felt too loud. It was never the grand gestures that held them. It was the small kindness you offered without knowing they needed it. It was the way you listened without immediately judging. It was the calm they felt when your attention was fully present. They began to understand that what they missed was not merely talking to you. They missed who they became when they felt safe enough to be themselves around you. But their message is not asking you to erase the past. They know there were moments when they could have spoken and did not. They know their uncertainty may have left you questioning your value. They know that silence can sometimes sound like rejection, even when it is born from fear and confusion. And so they wrote, "I am sorry for every moment my hesitation made you feel unimportant. You were never unimportant to me. I simply did not know how to hold something that mattered this much." There is maturity in that admission, because they are not asking you to pretend nothing happened. They are taking responsibility for the distance their silence created. They understand that love cannot survive on hidden feelings alone. It needs clarity. It needs courage. It needs two people willing to speak before assumptions take the place of truth. Something important is waiting for you in what they wrote next, because this is where the message stopped being a confession about yesterday and became a possibility for tomorrow. They said they are not asking for an instant answer. They are not asking you to make a promise before you are ready. They are asking only that you do not judge the entire connection by the chapter in which they were most afraid. They want you to know that they have been reflecting, not merely longing. They have been examining their patterns, their hesitation, and the ways they retreat whenever something feels real. They are beginning to see that protecting themselves from every possible disappointment also protects them from the closeness they claim to want. And for the first time, they are willing to do something differently. Not perfectly. Not dramatically. Honestly. The person you love wants to meet you in a place where neither of you has to guess. A place where affection is not hidden inside mixed signals. A place where questions can be asked without shame and answers can be given without games. They know that rebuilding trust, if it is needed, cannot happen through one emotional message. It happens through consistent actions, patient conversations, and the willingness to remain present when vulnerability feels uncomfortable. Their words are not a guarantee. They are an opening. And perhaps that is why this message feels so urgent to them. They are not afraid of time itself. They are afraid of allowing another meaningful moment to pass while both of you continue believing stories that may not be true. Maybe you believe they had forgotten. They had not. Maybe you thought they never understood what existed between you. They did, but only after distance forced them to recognize what closeness had quietly given them. Maybe you questioned whether your care was one-sided. Their message cannot rewrite every uncertain moment, but it reveals that you were never alone in feeling the weight of this connection. They felt it too. They simply carried it differently. Then came the line they almost removed. The line that remained on the screen while they stared at it, wondering whether it revealed too much. If there is still a small space in your heart where an honest conversation can exist, please do not close it before I have the chance to show you that I finally understand what I was risking. Notice what they are truly asking. Not for immediate forgiveness. Not for blind faith. Not for you to abandon your boundaries. They are asking for the possibility of being heard. And you are allowed to take your time. You are allowed to protect the peace you worked hard to create. You are allowed to listen without making a decision in the same moment. A sincere message does not demand that you ignore your needs. It invites clarity while respecting your freedom. Somewhere behind their words, they hope you will recognize that they are no longer speaking from impulse. They are speaking from the quiet realization that love is not proven by how intensely someone feels in private, but by how honestly they are willing to show up in reality. That realization changed them. It softened their pride. It made them see how many beautiful things are lost not because love is absent, but because courage arrives too late. They do not want courage to arrive too late this time. And yet, there is still one part of the message they have not fully revealed. A part connected to the moment they finally understood why they kept returning to you, even after convincing themselves they should move on. It was not only memory. It was not loneliness. It was something specific you once said, something you may not even remember, that became a mirror they could no longer avoid. When they remembered those words, they realized the real reason they had been afraid to love you openly. And in the next part of their message, they are finally going to tell you what those words were, and why hearing them again changed the decision they were about to make. There was no dramatic revelation when that memory returned. It arrived quietly, almost unnoticed, as though it had been waiting patiently for the exact moment when they were finally ready to understand it. They had spent so much time searching for a single reason behind everything they felt that they overlooked the smallest detail, the one sentence you spoke without trying to make an impression. To you, it may have been an ordinary conversation. To them, it became something they carried long after the moment had passed. You once said that the strongest connections are not built by perfect timing but by people who choose honesty when pretending would be easier. At the time, they smiled, nodded, and let the conversation move on. But those words stayed with them. They settled somewhere deep inside, quietly waiting for the day when they would become impossible to ignore. That day has finally arrived. For weeks, perhaps even longer than they care to admit, they kept asking themselves why they could never fully let go. They tried to stay busy. They convinced themselves that enough time would soften every feeling. They believed distance would eventually become peace. Yet every attempt to move forward brought them back to the same quiet realization. It was never your memory that followed them. It was the truth they had avoided. They realized they had been asking life to give them certainty before they were willing to offer sincerity. And life rarely works that way. Sometimes the first step belongs to the one who has remained silent the longest. That realization did not make everything easy. If anything, it made their heart feel even more exposed. They understood that writing this message meant accepting whatever answer might come. Hope always carries a little uncertainty with it. But for the first time, uncertainty felt lighter than regret. Regret had become too heavy to carry any longer. They no longer wanted to imagine what could have happened if they had simply spoken from the beginning. Then another memory surfaced, one they had almost forgotten. It was a quiet moment between the two of you when neither of you was trying to impress the other. There were no perfect words, no unforgettable gestures, just an ordinary conversation that somehow felt completely effortless. Looking back now, they understand why that moment matters so much. Around you, silence never felt uncomfortable. It felt safe. There was no need to fill every pause. Somehow, simply being present was enough. That kind of peace is rare, and only after losing it did they understand its value. Don't skip, because this next part of their message is where everything begins to shift. They admitted something they had never shared with anyone else. There were nights when they almost reached out. More than once, they opened a blank message, typed your name, wrote a few honest lines, and then erased every single word. Not because they stopped caring. Quite the opposite. They cared so deeply that they feared saying the wrong thing would close the door forever. They convinced themselves that waiting one more day would somehow make the conversation easier. But another day became another week became another month, and silence slowly began writing a story that neither of you had actually chosen. One evening, while reflecting on everything that had happened, they asked themselves a question they could no longer escape. What if the distance between us isn't created by fate, but by everything we've never dared to say? That question changed them. Instead of blaming circumstances, they began examining themselves. They noticed how often fear disguised itself as patience. How often hesitation pretended to be wisdom. How many opportunities disappear, not because they are taken away, but because they are left untouched for too long. Stay till the end, because something important is waiting for you. As they continued writing, their message became less about convincing you and more about understanding themselves. They wrote, I don't want you to remember me as someone who always almost spoke. I want to become someone whose actions finally match what has always lived in my heart. Those words were difficult to write because they required humility. They knew that promises alone are easy. Real change is quieter. It appears through consistency, through showing up even when conversations become uncomfortable, through listening instead of assuming, through choosing openness instead of retreating behind uncertainty. Then they paused. For several minutes, nothing more was written. Not because they had run out of words. Because they were deciding whether to include the one truth they had protected from everyone, including themselves. When they finally continued, their handwriting seemed slower, more thoughtful. I spent so much time wondering whether you truly understood me, that I never stopped to ask whether I had truly understood you. That sentence became the turning point of the entire message. They began remembering moments they had misunderstood completely. Times when your quietness wasn't distance but reflection. Times when your patience wasn't uncertainty but respect. Times when they assumed you had stopped caring, when perhaps you were simply giving them the space they believed they needed. Suddenly, the story they had been telling themselves no longer made sense. What if both of you had been protecting each other at the exact same time? What if every unanswered question had another answer waiting behind it? That possibility filled them with something they had not felt for a very long time. Not certainty. Hope. A calm, grounded hope that grows when people stop assuming and start understanding. Something important is waiting just beyond this realization. Because after everything they had written, after every honest confession and every quiet apology, they reached the final page of the message. There, they placed one last sentence. It was not dramatic. It was not designed to persuade. It was simply the truest thing they had ever written. And before sealing the message, they looked at those words one final time, wondering if they were finally brave enough to let you read them. Those final words have not been revealed yet, because they carry the one realization that transformed everything they believed about you, about themselves, and about what this connection could still become. The quietest moments often carry the greatest weight, and this was one of them. The message had reached its final page, yet their hand refused to let go of the pen. They stared at the words as though reading them for the first time, wondering whether honesty had arrived too late, or exactly when it was meant to. There was no dramatic soundtrack, no perfect setting, only a heart that had finally grown tired of hiding behind unfinished sentences. In that silence, they realized something unexpected. They had spent so much energy trying to protect themselves from disappointment that they had also protected themselves from the possibility of something beautiful becoming real. They began reading the entire message from the beginning. Every paragraph reminded them of a different version of themselves. The uncertain version. The guarded version. The hopeful version they kept trying to silence. And as they reached the final lines again, one thought became impossible to ignore. If this message never reached you, you would only remember the silence. You would never know the truth that had quietly existed behind it all along. Don't skip, because the next realization changed the meaning of everything they had written. They finally understood that love is not measured by how long feelings are hidden. It is measured by the courage to express them with kindness, patience, and respect. They no longer wanted to be remembered as someone who always had good intentions but never found the right moment. The right moment was never going to arrive on its own. It had to be created. Then another memory surfaced, softer than all the others. They remembered the way you once encouraged someone without expecting anything in return. You probably never noticed them watching. You spoke with quiet sincerity, and then you moved on as though it were nothing special. But to them, that moment revealed the kind of person you truly were. It wasn't perfection that drew them closer. It was your consistency. The way your kindness stayed the same whether anyone noticed or not. Stay till the end, because something important is waiting for you. That memory became the reason they refused to leave another chapter unfinished. They stopped asking themselves whether they deserved to be heard and started asking a better question. What kind of future am I choosing if I let fear make every important decision for me? The answer came gently. Not the future they wanted. So they folded the letter carefully, not because every uncertainty had disappeared, but because they finally believed that honesty deserved a chance to be seen. They accepted that your answer would always belong to you, and they respected that completely. Yet they also knew that you deserved the truth instead of another season of unanswered silence. Just before they sealed the envelope, they added one final note beneath everything else. I don't expect yesterday to change. I simply hope tomorrow has the opportunity to begin differently. That single sentence carried more peace than every page before it. It wasn't asking you to erase mistakes. It wasn't asking you to ignore your own journey. It was simply opening a door that had remained closed for far too long. As they placed the message where it could finally reach you, they felt something they had not experienced in a very long time. Relief. Because for the first time, nothing meaningful remained hidden. Yet there is still one final page you have not seen. The page that reveals what happened after the message was finally sent, and why that quiet moment became the beginning of a completely different story. Morning arrived without any grand announcement. The world moved exactly as it always had, yet for the person who sent that message, everything felt different. For the first time in a long while, they were no longer carrying words that had never been spoken. Whatever happened next would no longer be shaped by silence. It would be shaped by truth. They did not spend the day searching for signs or trying to predict the future. Instead, they allowed themselves something they had been denying for far too long: peace. They understood that genuine care cannot be forced, and meaningful connections are never strengthened by pressure. They had done the one thing they had been avoiding for so long. They had been honest. Hours passed. Then another. There was still no certainty about what tomorrow might bring. But something inside them had already changed. They realized that the greatest victory was not receiving an immediate answer. It was becoming the kind of person who no longer hid behind fear. Whatever came next would be met with the same honesty that inspired the message in the first place. And then they remembered the very first line they had written before everything else. Not the apology. Not the confession. Not even the hope. It was a simple sentence that had quietly guided every word that followed. I never wanted to leave you wondering what was true. That was the heart of the entire message. Not to convince. Not to persuade. Simply to replace uncertainty with sincerity. Perhaps that is why this story feels familiar to so many hearts. Sometimes the greatest distance between two people is not created by miles or time. It is created by the words both of them quietly believe are too late to say. Yet life has a remarkable way of reminding us that kindness spoken today is far more powerful than perfect words imagined tomorrow. If this message has unfolded before you like a slow sunrise, let its deepest meaning remain with you. Value the people who bring peace instead of confusion. Protect the conversations that deserve honesty instead of assumptions. Never underestimate the quiet power of a sincere heart willing to speak with respect. The person you love did not send this final message because they had all the answers. They sent it because they finally understood that truth, expressed with humility, is never wasted. And perhaps that is the real ending. Not the moment the message was delivered. Not the moment it was read. But the moment silence finally stopped deciding the story. From that quiet turning point, whatever comes next is no longer written by fear. It is written by courage, patience, understanding, and the hope that two hearts willing to be honest can always create a better chapter than the one they almost left unfinished. And with that realization, the final message no longer feels like an ending at all. It feels like the first page of a story that was finally ready to begin. Long after the message had been read, one quiet realization continued to echo where no one else could hear it. The words themselves were never the greatest gift. The greatest gift was the courage behind them. Courage has a gentle way of changing people long before the outcome is known, and that quiet transformation became the true beginning of everything that followed. Days later, when life returned to its familiar rhythm, something subtle had changed. Conversations felt more genuine. Moments that once slipped by unnoticed suddenly carried meaning. The person who had once hidden behind uncertainty no longer searched for the perfect sentence. They had learned that sincerity, even when imperfect, reaches farther than flawless words left unspoken. There was one final thought they wished they could leave with you, though it was never written inside the message itself. If our paths continue together, let it be because we chose honesty over assumption. And if life asks us to grow before we meet again, let that growth be guided by kindness rather than regret. Those words remained unwritten, yet they were present in every line. Perhaps that is why this story never truly belonged to one person alone. It belongs to anyone who has ever waited for the right time, anyone who has replayed old conversations hoping to understand them more clearly, anyone who has discovered that the heart becomes lighter the moment truth replaces silence. The message was called The Final Message, but its deepest purpose was never to close a door. Its purpose was to close a chapter of uncertainty. Because endings built on honesty often become the strongest foundations for new beginnings. And somewhere, beyond all the questions that once seemed impossible to answer, two people now stand with something they did not have before. Not certainty. Not perfection. But the quiet confidence that whatever tomorrow brings, it will never again be shaped by the words they were too afraid to say. That is how the story truly ends. Not with dramatic promises. Not with impossible guarantees. But with two hearts finally understanding that the most meaningful message is never the longest one. It is the one that arrives exactly when someone is finally ready to hear it, and has the courage to answer with the same honesty in return.